And thank you very much for joining this. I'm sure there are pressing things that are important to all of you that you need to do, and other important things on the personal front that you could have given time to, but we are privileged to have your presence here today. And I think, like they say, right, every Bollywood director, producer says, this movie is different, ye hatke hoga. And I'm sure, like Anand Mahindra says, this whole webinar thing is death by webinar. My only submission with the panelists here today is to say, ye hatke hoga. Our attempt is to try and make this different, something that hopefully that is takeaways for you at the end of this. I think I look at this topic about the whole new normal and I think about this. I think that clearly the size and speed of the events brought about by the whole COVID-19 this year have really been dizzying. They've come so fast and thick that it's hard to remember just how radical some of them have really been. Whilst life will return to a semblance of somewhat of what the past we've known, but in more areas than one, might be expected, life will never again, ever be the same. And therefore, whilst our friends in CII decided to call this the new normal, I think I'd like to beg a bit differently with respect to this and think that what we are really talking about is new realities that are really dawning upon us, because I don't necessarily believe that what we are going to enter into soon is going to be a normal, right? It's constantly going to unfold and unfurl in front of us, and therefore I think I'd like to call it new realities that are going to be dawning upon us. And this is typically what crises tend to do. And in the midst of pain and despair that they bring about, new thinking and frequently accelerate the much needed reforms. If you go back in history, the 1918 global flu epidemic really did the basis for the national health services in many European countries. The Great Depression of 1929, quickly that followed by the Second World War, set the stage for a modern welfare state. And in joining to that list is COVID-19. And I'd like to believe that it will truly accelerate change in economic and social thinking towards the new emerging realities. And I think some of that, all of us, whether we are in HR or whether we are in C-suite within organizations or even employees of other organizations, you've seen some of that affect us, whether it is the supply chain implications and the whole move to reduce the dependency on China and the flexing that we're seeing China do. A lot of us were hit by the just-in-time inventory and the distributed component sourcing models that we had. And then now the need to have an approach that you have backups and safety nets built so that you don't face disruption. We all know that not just in India, but in other parts of the world, government stimuluses have come in. Now, they say there are no free lunches, right? And therefore, with government stimulus is going to come state intervention and scrutiny into the business, into the future. But I think the greatest change will really be at the human level. And with the cost of the global economy of this pandemic to the tune of about $8.8 trillion, more than about $1,000 per person is the impact of this on the planet. Now, everyone will be poorer as a result of this pandemic, right? But I think we're not talking about the wealthy. They can sustain this. 1.6 billion workers in the informal economy are going to be impacted by this. And if you look at just us closer here in India, 90% of the workforce is set to be in the informal sector. And without alternative income sources, the workers, their families will have no means really to survive. And I think compounded with all of this, with some of the things that we are starting to see and experience, the challenges that the MSMEs are facing today, some of us in business are going to start feeling like humans are really bad, right? Because they tend to fall sick. They have a chance of catching the virus. And machines don't have all of that. And my fear is COVID-19 will greatly speed up the replacement of humans by machines, resulting potentially in the next wave of mass unemployment. So this and more sets us to the stage of our conversation with our HR leaders here. And I really want to try and talk about this in 2 to 3 parts. The first part of the conversation I really want to focus on with respect to what the now is looking like. The now wherein It's about 75 days. We're still in lockdown. And how have these HR leaders partnered with their business in helping it deal with the situation? So that's the first part. I then want to spend time with some of the stuff that I talked about to really put out a crystal ball to say, what does the future look like from a people standpoint, from a talent agenda standpoint, and what do these HR leaders believe we will have to do to be able to surmount that? And then towards the last phase of this conversation, we'd like to pull it together in some sort of a model where we want to talk about what is advice, if any, that these leaders have for all of us as we move forward in enabling our businesses to be sustainable, in enabling our communities to be sustainable going forward. So I think that's how I'd like to play this up. We want to do this in the most interactive fashion, so we will try and take a pause at a logical point, look for questions, look for some polling that we will do to try and get a sense of what the audience is feeling. But I'm going to start off with my questions. I think the first question that I really want to ask, and more in the spirit of warming up, really, is to Lipika, right? We've almost been in lockdown now for 75 days, right? So we will get to work, we will get to all of those things. But at a personal level, right? If somebody was to tell you that this lockdown is potentially going to be about 75 to 90 days, what are things that you would have got together to be able to be better prepared for this situation?
Okay, hi Unmesh. That's a very interesting question because I think what was the most critical thing while balancing the whole thing is you're staying at home and also working. So it's work and home that you had to balance. And that came as a huge bombarding kind of impacting kind of thing, wherein you don't have those compartments placed. So one of the things which I would have done maybe was order a robot so that I could have some things automated and get things done fast, like your room cleaning, sweeping, dusting, the major things which you never think about as a regular practice and which you have already outsourced and have people supporting you on those. So maybe I would have brought a dishwasher, a robo kind of things which could help me in these aspects, because no one plans for this. When one is talking about continuity or exigencies, no one plans for the fact that one day everything is going to be under lockdown and you have to do everything from A to Z. So that's how I would, I would have started off.
And then what about you? If I were to ask you the same question, Kundan, what would you have got together if you would have known that this lockdown is going to be like the 75, 90 days?
Yeah, so, frankly, in the last 60 days, I have had, celebrations in the family, being in this situation. So my wife's birthday, my parents' anniversary, my kids' birthday, all of it happened here. So if given a chance, probably if I knew that it was like 70 days or more, I actually for sure would have purchased good gifts for them, to start with. And yeah, I think, I'm probably, given a chance, I would have called my parents as well as parents-in-law over here. Both of us would have been, with peace of mind. The kid would have been taken care of. Yeah, that would have been a couple of things that I would have done. Yeah.
Sure. And Preemita, what would you have done?
So yeah, as a working woman, I totally empathize with Lipika. My list would have been like that. In fact, in some of the town halls and catch-ups we did with our employees, they said, ma'am, from next time in reward and recognition, give dishwashers. So I think that is definitely topping the list. But having said that, personally, I feel I would have loved to, buy an instrument and take to music and, let it soothe me a little bit, because there were those times when, one really wanted to get that little bit of reflection and me time. And I think I would have done better if I had one with me.
Great. And Amit, coming to you.
Sure, Unmesh. First of all, good afternoon to you, to all our co-panelists today. Big thanks for having me on this panel today. Having known you for as long as I have, I can absolutely confirm that you will bring this session alive for us in ways that are uniquely yours. So look forward to the rest of the discussion today. I think on your question, what would I have done differently? I guess all of us are wiser in hindsight, right? But I've been thinking about it. The one thing I would have done differently if I had known, the lockdown would get prolonged to this extent is to listen to my wife more keenly. And I really mean that, I'm not saying that you should do it, listen to her only in times of crisis, but I think you should do that as a matter of practice. And why I say that is because, my daughter's in a boarding school, and just about the time that, the crisis sort of broke out, she was in the middle of her exams, and unfortunately, exams had to be cancelled. And, she told me, my wife told me, call her back on the next flight home because things could get uglier from here. But I didn't listen. I said that, look, exams are broken. Why don't you go and take some time off? And sure enough, next day, sort of flights were suspended. And, she's been away for 2.5 months now. So she's safe. So no concerns on that front. But it just taught me a lesson to always listen to her. Anyway, that was some weekend fun. But on a more serious note, I think what I would probably have done is, there is a member of parliament that stays where I do in our building. And I would have probably urged him to, take some more proactive steps in trying to mitigate this migrant crisis that confronts us. I think this has been one of the most horrifying and painful pictures of, I think, the last 70, 75 days. And if the government could have moved a little more, I think, decisively, I think a lot of this would have been addressed, I think, for the better of everyone. So I wish they had done that. I think their problems, and their miseries, I think, that are being reported consistently, I think are far, far bigger than all of the domestic challenges or work challenges that all of us confront. So that's just something that I was reflecting on.
No, thank you very much. I think very well put. Like, I think, look, every time I get onto conferences like these, webinars like these, or I reflect on things, and there are moments when you start feeling life sucks at point, right? Because your days just don't tend to end, and then you realize how privileged you are, and just feel gratitude for where we are right now. Because honestly, we have a roof over our head, we can get our meals, we can still do our stuff. But some of the migrant population have had to go through so much of difficult times, and I think it's one thing that 2020, a highlight of 2020 of how we manage this has clearly been our inability to have dealt sensitively with the whole migrant crisis. But thank you everybody for offering that early thing. So clearly we would have looked at situations and things and technology that enabled our life better and make things a bit easier. All of us at home have suddenly realized that whilst there is a role our maids play, but I think we can pick up and do those things too. It was difficult in the first week or 10 days. We started to realize that we have muscles that we've never realized for a long time, right? With all the cleaning and swabbing and dishwashing that is there. And slowly over the weeks, I think our chores at home kind of got divided. I chose the easier way out. I chose dishwashing and mopping and sweeping because I thought that was easier. It could be done at any given point of time. It wasn't limited saying it has to happen now, like breakfast, lunch, or dinner. But yes, so I think I want to move to the core part of our conversation. I think Amit said, on hindsight, we all sound wiser. And it's been about 75 days that we are in this lockdown. And hopefully all of us, and I think for me personally, life's never been as busy as it is. And I thought working from home is easy. For a decade, a part of my career or more, I worked from home. But this has been crazy because the week just passed. Saturday, Sunday seems to have lost its meaning. People just believe that you have nowhere else to go, so you can do a call at 8 a.m. in the morning and do a call at 10 o'clock in the night, right? So it's just available. But I'm going to start with Amit. I think, Amit, what I want you to do is first give context to your organization. I think, and when I say organization, is about the business you are in and what your workforce sounds like, right? And then tell us about what's been the learnings of the last 60, 70 days. So first to you, Amit.
So thanks, Unmesh. So I think we at Kotak are in the business of marketing, selling, distributing a whole host of life insurance products and services, right? To primarily two sets of clients. One is the group and institutional businesses, of course, that have a set of purchase decisions that they make for their employees. And the second is, I think, the more retail customers. So like you and me, I think, who purchase insurance products and services with a specific objective of either long-term savings or investment or protection, for ourselves or for our loved ones. And I think we cater to both of them. In all, I think we cover about 30 million lives through a combination of both the channels of distribution across the country. We have approximately about 8,000 or so full-time employees, which are distributed across 250 plus branches in the country, and probably an equal number of employees who work with us in a part-time or flex capacity as advisors and agents who actually, sort of approach the customer for their specific insurance requirements. It's a very distributed workforce. If I were to give you a perspective of what the workforce is all about, it's a very distributed workforce. It's a very market-led, very customer-led workforce. 2/3 or more of our workforce is our frontline salespeople who are out there in the front, dealing with customers day in and day out, with respect to their purchase decisions and having sold insurance policies, etc. How do they provide ongoing service support and deal with customers' queries, constantly sort of compare, contrast products across competition. It's an intensely competitive industry. There are 24 players in the private sector alone, in addition to the state behemoth, which is Life Insurance Corporation of India. So I think there's a very intense demand on the part of customers to not only engage in products, but also to sort of maintain ongoing engagement once a purchase decision itself is made. So I hope that's brought out some perspective on what the makeup of that workforce is all about. I think the challenges and also opportunities, for us as an insurance player in the country arise from that distributed nature of the workforce itself that is out there day in and day out, beating competition, staying ahead, servicing customers, placing the interests of our stakeholders uppermost in what they do. So I think in terms of, what were the crises, what were the challenges that hit us when I think the pandemic broke out, I think first and foremost, in the early part of the crisis, which was, let's say, a couple of weeks from the middle of March, when I think the entire country went into lockdown mode, the crisis or challenge was all about ensuring safety of our customers, distributors, and our clients, of course, and employees. So I think that was the uppermost challenge that we were confronted with, because you are in a situation which is unprecedented. You won't have an experience of really dealing with pandemic-like situations like this, which have not arisen in the past, at least not to this magnitude. Right? So that was probably the first challenge. The second challenge was all about, having understood the context, having grasped with what it means in the short, medium, and long term for us. The next challenge was to stand up a virtual organization, right? So that there is no immediate impact on our business continuity, on our business plans as a whole. And having to do that overnight, when you have been traditionally working face to face with customers, with your business partners, etc., is undoubtedly a challenge, right? From an IT infrastructure point of view, from a mindset point of view, from a culture point of view, and of course, from an adoption standpoint itself. And third, I think the big challenge, which is probably unique, I think, to the insurance industry, is having to deal with the headwinds that confronted us in the month of March itself, right? Traditionally, I think for domestic financial services, March has always been when most of the tax saving or investment decisions are made. And customers want to sort of push this to the time when they have to submit their tax returns. And a large part of the business, I think, accrues to us in the month of March itself. And that challenge, became very, very real this time around, when you found that 2-3 weeks of the month were disrupted significantly, because of the lockdown situation. And of course, the industry as a whole sort of saw contraction in volumes relative to the same period last year. So I think those were some of the challenges which have confronted us. But needless to say, I think there's a lot that has happened since then. And I think for each of these challenges, we've had immediate response that has helped us to not only get back on our feet, but also become stronger, become well positioned to be stronger in the time to come and achieve the industry leadership position that we so aspire to. And I think maybe we'll continue talking about what those opportunities are and how we went there as we go along.
Sure. Thank you very much. Preemita, I'm going to come to you, and if you could, like Amit, kind of created the portrait for us to say what the business landscape is and what your workforce challenges were, that would be great for us to be able to move forward. Over to you.
Yeah, so Hero FinCorp actually is a lending organization and a largely distributed organization. Once again, we service a very, very diverse set of customers, starting from lending for a bike, which is a Hero bike, to lending to the promoters. So if you will see, the complete consumer segment is divided into masses, mass affluent, and classes, right? We will have small proprietors, we will have industrialists, and then we will have retail customers who would be there in the rural part of the country. So to service these customers, once again, we would have a very, very diverse workforce, because, you know, to be able to engage with the customer, to form good relationships with the customer, the employee mindset has to be similar to the demographics of the customer. So our employee base is therefore as diverse as our consumer segment is. We are about 24,000 assets under management kind of a lending organization, and about 8,000 employees spanning 20,000 pin codes in the country. So wherever you will find, there are about 22,000 pin codes in the country, and you will see our presence in almost 20,000 of them. So you can imagine the length and breadth of the presence of the organization. Obviously, when a pandemic, which is going to impact the complete world and will touch so many lives, dawns upon us, our challenges are in front of us, because we would have a very, very diverse workforce to take care of. We would have to consider the mindsets of a very, very diverse consumer segment. And once again, the strength and the opportunity lies in the distributed workforce and the distributed customer segment that we had. Of course, when something like this happens, you know, the complete business landscape has changed ever since. It's all about cash conservation. A non-banking financial services company that we are really has 4 tenets of business, right? Cash is important. Capital is important, because that is by virtue of which you're going to be lending. Credit is important, because that's how you underwrite the risk. Yeah. And then, of course, the culture is important. Now, the first 3 tenets literally changed in the last 3 months. They have completely changed. We cannot be using past principles to be underwriting, because the consumer behavior has completely changed. So it is actually looking into newer trends, trying to anticipate the needs of the customer post this pandemic, which has been a huge challenge. Capital, of course, once again, some capital is infused by the shareholders, but then you have to raise capital from the banks, and we hear it in the news, and the status of the economy is with us. Even when the RBI is trying to infuse liquidity, the banks are not really poised to lend so much to the NBFCs, and therefore that liquidity is again getting converted into cash reserves, and of course cash reserve for us. Similarly, the retail customers, the SME customers are conserving cash. So for us right now, the challenges have been on collections. The challenges have been on anticipating how we would underwrite the credit again. And for our employees, in terms of how to understand these mindsets, how to deal with this dynamism has been a huge, huge challenge. As HR, we are supposed to partner with business to address all of these challenges and convert them into opportunities. So in the last 3 months, we have tried our best to harness the distribution strength of our organization and see if the customers are not interested in lending products, if they are interested in insurance products, and can we partner with our partner organizations to leverage that distribution network and keep people purposeful. That has been one thing. The other thing, of course, has been hugely reskilling, because when collections is a big challenge, then you have to have all your employees having a collection mindset, and those who are doing sales to train them, reskill on the collection mindset, again to go back to the same customers and have conversations around it. Most importantly, communication, and that's where the conserving culture part comes as far as I am concerned, and the HR team and the HR department played a huge role with the leadership team to keep the employees engaged and further train them to keep the customers engaged in this time. The mantra was that we will keep in touch with our customers, we will keep the relationships alive as we are doing it with our employees, so that we are the first port of call when things start looking a little better. Over to you, Vaish.
It's very interesting you say that. I think it's amazing how business disruptions have played out, and both of you, Amit, as well as you, Preemita, have people who are feet on the street to an extent, right? I think I overheard a conversation I was having with someone, and the CEO of a pharma company was saying that I have 2,000 field force that actually goes doctor to doctor, selling meds to them or pushing meds that they need to. And he was saying that right now, none of my foot soldiers are on the street, but I'm still selling as much as I would have sold when things were normal. But yes, I mean, different scenarios, different business cycles mean different things for different businesses. Kundan, coming to you, I think if you could, in the same way, try to lace us what your workforce challenges are and what were some of the quick learnings there, and that will be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Integrate is a InvIT. Now, InvIT as a platform is fairly new to the country. So it's called Investment Infrastructure Trust. And in 2014, SEBI introduced the InvIT regulations, and it kind of got published in 2017. The organization came into effect in 2016 sometime. Today marks 3 years of our listing on stock exchanges. So the concept or the product is based on REITs or the business trusts, which are existing in developed markets like Singapore, US, and UK. So basically, InvITs are cash flow efficient product or structures which owns operating assets. Now, these operating assets can be anywhere. It could be a real estate asset, it could be road asset, it could be into power transmission or any other asset into infrastructure. We are primarily into power transmission till now, the organization was set up for owning, operating power transmission assets. Power transmission, if you understand about infrastructure assets, are considered as one of the lowest risk assets compared to roads and real estate and some other assets. And then the intent of the organization or the vision of the organization was to be a yield vehicle which is stable, as well as the vision says to be is to be admired yield vehicle in Asia. Now, with that intent, the focus of the in terms of the capital, the focus has been to tap into pension funds, life insurance companies, and into owning infrastructure assets which are missing till date. So with that set of understanding, the investments in the last 3 years and the growth of the organization has given us some leverage in this particular period. And frankly, in terms of business, except for collections, we haven't been facing much of a challenge. Coming in, so we are kind of a tripod setup. On one side, we are an InvIT. On other side, we are a listed organization, and on other side, we are a utility company also. So very early in the lockdown, we were given the essential services regulations, and we kind of started the operations in our sites to a good extent. So what it gave us was some bit of flexibility to kind of really operate at the site levels, while the office staff started working from home. And very frankly, I would say none of us were prepared whether the lockdown will be for how long. So I remember my first circular to the organization, it was for 14 days. And so the preparation was for 14 days, right? So we were never ready in terms of how it will move on. One of the big challenges which I and the team faced was, we had huge number of joiners in this period. Now, on one side, when you have an organization which is growing fast and is not being affected too much, so you have people who are performing and you are, who are expecting to grow with the organization. And you have an influx of new people, new talent coming in who are expecting to be onboarded well and gel well in the organization. So it wasn't easy. So that's what the real challenge for me has been, as well as for the team, to how do we really ensure that the energy which is there in the organization, the kind of that we have developed in the organization, the people who are outside really understand that, and yeah, so that continues in the fashion.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lipika. So you know that organization is a tech organization, right? So I think the environment of a tech organization is very different to what we heard our other co-panelists talk about. So Tell me about, if you talk about a little bit about your workforce and what were some of the challenges that you faced in your organization.
Yeah, Umesh, I couldn't hear you properly, but I assume you asked about the challenges that we faced as an organization which is into IT from the technology area. I think I caught those small words and basically phrased it together to understand what you were asking. Okay, so
okay.
yeah.
Before you go, I think can the others hear me clearly or no? Okay, great. Go ahead, Lipika.
Okay, so CRM Next is basically an India origin, a global IT product company. We have the world's most powerful financial CRM software product. And most of our clients, the majority of our clients are basically banks, insurance companies, and financial institutes. And we have, we work with banks like SBI, RBI, ICICI, HDFC. So any of the big names in India, them, and similarly in the global scenario also, we have most of the big banks in US, Middle East, Southeast Asia, all of us working on our product, on our platforms. So when such a pandemic situation happened and such a situation where everything was shut down and put on the lockdown happened, actually there were two fronts. One was the business front and one was the employee front in terms of the challenges that we faced. And one of the main challenges for us was to ensure business continuity, not only for ourselves, but for our clients also. Like to ensure that our clients were able to serve their client base without any disruptions. Because as big banks, they had their own dependencies and people were dependent on them for multiple activities. Their regular activities of cash, credit, whatever it is, loans and all that. So one of our main focus areas was to ensure that they had their business continuity. So that was one of our primary areas. The second area was to talk to the clients, work with them closely and ensure and give them confidence about the data security. With banks and financial institutions and insurance, you have to give them confidence about business continuity, about data security, about work without any kind of disruptions. So these were some of the challenges that we worked with. We already had our IT infrastructure, which was strong enough to provide for this, but no one in their business continuity plan, I'm sure, has ever worked out the fact that, we are going to face an earthquake or a terrorist attack or some such fire incident, but no one, I don't think anyone till now had worked out a business continuity plan which would cover clients across global, globe, across geography kind of situations. So we had to, when planning, take care of our own, situation and our constraints and our what kind of facilities we had, and also keep in mind what the other clients, our clients had in place, so that they can be aligned and the service can be provided accordingly. So those were the things which took up a lot of our time in the initial 1 week or so. And in terms of our employee base, because ours is a product company, we have around 900 odd people with us, and who are spread across geographies. Around 86% to 87% of them are having laptops. So from the laptop point of view, there was no challenges in terms of access and things like that, being able to work remotely. But we had challenges in terms of providing them, a lot of our work is on code, working on the code. So how to ensure that there is a access given to the code, the VPN access, the local database, the server. So all these had to be worked out. So those were some of the challenges which needed to be worked out upon in the first couple of days. Our IT and the operation had to work 24/7 on this through email, chat, phone. I don't think they took a single moment's break from that perspective, because we had to ensure that our clients were working without any disruptions. So giving access to employees so that they can work uninterruptedly was one of the things. The other thing, from the human perspective, a lot of them were first-time virtual managers. By that I mean that we did have work from home facility which was given, but that was given on selective basis or as a flexi benefit basis, but never as a, in such a huge scale or in a big way. So not all managers were equipped to, manage this kind of virtual teams, 100% virtual teams. So that was also one of the things. We are a small company, very flat organization, but those were the things learned that we had to do in terms of teaching, coaching, helping them, guiding them, and things like that. So that was another thing. And basically, we had to, like Kundan mentioned, define a lot of processes online immediately within a day's time, like virtual joining, virtual exits, virtual performance management, virtual team coordination, collaboration, all these things. I think these were some of the top things which we had to face as an organization.
Thank you very much, Lipika. So I'm going to come to Preemita, back to you, right? So I think all of us in what was a 2-day time or 3-day time suddenly had to, from front lines, move all the way back and yet keep the fire, keep our businesses going. And in this entire thing, I think the piece I want to really tease out is how did we ensure that we kept the morale of our employees high? And connected with that, I think the joining question is how did we ensure that our supervisors and line managers were playing their part? Because like what Lipika just said, there were some of the people who were first-time managers, and that is challenging. So what did you specifically do to be able to try and counter this, or rather enable this in a much more better way?
Sure, Mesh. So yes, like you said, lights had to be kept on even when the country was brought into a lockdown and a complete lockdown in almost instantaneously. But the businesses had challenged. Of course, I'm sure Amit will also be able to, relate to this. When you have a very large distributed workforce, your managers are really your people managers. They are the HR managers. They are the people managers more than the HR team per se. So culture becomes central to this whole piece. Also, as it is always said that, crisis does not build the character. It actually reveals the character. So we used that kind of communication also to keep the motivation and the spark in our managers alive, that this is really the time for them to stand up and rise. As an HR head, as the, I would like to use the analogy of a glue that holds things together in the organization, right? You may not have your own identity in that sense, but you're really the one that keeps everything together. We were playing a central part in communication. What we did was that, in fact, just after the lockdown, every single day for 29 days in a row, we were doing virtual sessions in the evening. 1 hour virtual session where the entire organization was coming together. And that infused a lot of energy, because what we felt was that the role of HR right now was to keep the energy in the organization high. It was also to provide a platform for those managers who were doing well to come and talk about. And these were not like a monologue sessions that we were doing. We were trying to make them as interactive. Like I said, it is about highlighting the culture. So all the initiatives that were taken through the year, we had done first time managers training programs. We brought those managers and got them to ideate with the audience in terms of how to manage teams right now. We also got speakers from the industry to talk to them about how to manage the teams in a virtual setting. We had some of our leaders coming and talking to the employees. We had some of the psychologists coming and talking about mental well-being, and doctors talking about physical well-being. So what we ensured was that the ecosystem which is felt in an office and the collaborative network which is felt in an office, we needed to create the same setting but in a virtual context. And that could not be throughout the day, but 1 hour of the day it was important, because that was important to keep people together. And that was important to do at this point in time where everything had just, given way. So that was one thing that we did to keep people together. Besides that, like I have shared, what we did do was we, had specific groups of managers created, and we were doing, again, infusing energy in them and doing calls with them to make sure that they are discussing with their teams. We are giving them quick tips on 3 things. Coffee sessions you have to do, reskilling or upskilling, whichever. Reskilling or upskilling sessions you have to do, and you have to take some 3 processes or 4 processes on which you and your teams have been working in the past. You have to bring out those processes and rethink and reimagine those processes. These were 3 things that we mandated for all our managers to do so that they can keep going through this. These would be few ideas that we did. I'm sure others
Thank you
would.
very much. So I'm going to move the dial a bit slightly, Amit. So this is what we did to be able to ensure that we build organizational or people resiliency so that people felt that there's still nurturance, there is care, there is engagement, there is investment in them, as also the whole overwhelm that people were sensing because they were working longer hours, they had to deal with absence of home support by virtue of maids, etc. So people were doing housework, people were doing work at home, in addition to being confined to small spaces or dealing with children. So I think we all did what we could to try and help our people cope with that better. But the connected point to this, Amit, is really about building organizational resiliency to be able to sustain the environment. And some of you talked about this to say cash is king, right? I think you got to preserve cash, you got to preserve money because we really don't know how long this game has to be played, right? It's not a T20, it's not a test match, it's going to get over in 5 days. We just don't know how long we are in this. We are clearly in for the long battle because the vaccine seems to be a year away. Like SARS, if this virus vanishes, we're all lucky. If it isn't, it's really calling for a new reality that we have to confront. So talk to us a bit and more from a guidance to say what thinking that you and the leadership team went through when you looked at ensuring that economically the business is sustainable, and then talk about what role you guys played. And then I can see some questions with respect to how did you equip your clients to come up the digital curve together, right? So I think those are 2 questions. It's a double barrel. If you could try and succinctly respond to that.
Sure, Mesh. I think these are great questions, and I think these are some of the more strategic choices, dilemmas, decisions that confront most organizations. And I think in that sense, our industry, our organization wasn't any different. See, I'll try and provide perspective on what is it that is really shifting in the sense of the industry and how I think this new normal, next normal, or I think more appropriately, as you put it, this moving reality, right, which isn't very static, but it is constantly evolving and constantly shifting until sort of we can all get our arms around it convincingly, right? See, I think to me, the next reality is really a combination of practices, assumptions, and beliefs, A, that need to be sustained, and B, that need to be reimagined or reinvented, right? I think it's a combination of sustenance and reimagination that jointly, I feel, will help us to craft the next set of realities and business practices for all of us. And the answers are going to be different, I guess, for different businesses as the reality unfolds for them and their industries. Now, what do I mean by sustain and by reimagination? I think one of the things that we absolutely need to preserve, right, by way of the economic well-being of the organization and preserving, I think, the financials of the organization are practices that have helped us to sustain this period, right? From the time, those are more short to medium term. I think these are practices that have helped us to see the worst of the crisis from the time that we could not absolutely stand up on our feet, when I think, there was a very immediate hit of people on our business, on our clients, etc., that they didn't have answers to, right? In terms of where to and I think some of the practices that have helped us to sustain that.
Has Amit's internet frozen?
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Yeah.
I can hear you. Can you hear me, Unmesh?
Go ahead.
I think that these are all practices that are more focused on operational efficiency achievements in the short term. So things like virtual working, which is more than just work from home. It could be work from anywhere. It could be working, not just employees working from home, but also your extended sort of workforce, your partners working anywhere. So I think virtual working, making sure that disruptions to the business are minimized, making sure that IT infrastructure is resilient, and making sure that short-term decisions deliver. I think some of the operation efficiency parameters that you are taking are probably the most important decisions that we needed to take, and those are the ones that have sustained us, right? I'll give you an example. I think when we saw that the hit in March was quite significant, I think as an immediate response, I think we communicated to our workforce and to our business partners that we would make sure that we bounce back even more strongly in April and thereafter, right? So we would pick up our numbers, we would incentivize employees on delivery, and we would make sure that the earnings that they had lost in the previous month would be more than compensated by having targets that were realistic. We could get them to deliver those with all of the training and I think the digital infrastructure push that we provided, so that confidence in the short to medium term of our workforce would be restored, right? So I think those are some of the practices that have helped us to sustain the organization in this phase. And these, I think we will carry forward as important learnings in the new normal. The second set of practices, I think, are the more strategic choices to be made, right? Which is what I call reinvention, simply because the world of the future, the business environment of the future, will look very different from what we've been historically, used to operating in, right? So, as you've heard very often, what you hear will not get you there, and I think that is probably more relevant. I think more pertinent now than it ever has been. You will not have the luxury of meeting people face to face all the time that you want. You will not have the luxury of traveling all the time that you want. You will not have the luxury of necessarily being confined in one physical space or environment to do all of the events that you've historically done. So how do you cope with this new reality, right? I mean, these are practices that I think will require reimagination or reinvention. So I think from the point of view of customers and employees, reimagining the experience journeys themselves will really help us to deliver value in newer and different ways. And I think we're already on that journey. The one advantage we had is that we have progressed our employee digitization journey significantly to be able to ensure last mile connectivity, and that helped us to come out more strongly from this phase, and we're well poised to take advantage of the new phase itself. The one realization out of this phase is also that the demand for insurance and insurance products is only going to become stronger in the future, and therefore how we equip our workforce with the capacity now will ensure that we see that opportunity when it comes to us, rather than leaving money on the table when the business bounce back comes around. So I think balancing the short-term needs with the longer-term opportunities is how I would say we have created sort of value for ourselves and created that competitive differentiation versus the others.
Thank you very much, Amit. So I think so you've already kind of created the segue for us to move forward. But I think when I look back and reflect, and I'm going to not look, try and stay within the remit of the organization, I think few things have clearly happened. I think people have started to see that a little bit of social interactions at work have kind of got restricted, because once you're connected virtually, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it is Microsoft Teams or Zoom, you tend to or end up calling people that you're much more connected with or have a comfort with. And therefore people that you would bump up at a coffee vending machine or in the cafeteria, that doesn't happen. And I think the question that is generally asked is saying, will that collaboration that kind of infuses innovation in the organization, will that be lost because of that? The second one is, I think, there's a sense of energy depletion that our workforce is feeling, because all of us seem to be just working endlessly all the time. Families, work-life balance that we talked so much about, suddenly we've all seemed to have had so much of it, right? And I think we realize that families have a role to play. Families are very important to be invested in, but somewhere or the other we need boundaries, and somewhere or the other we need our me time, we need our time to be able to focus. And because of the situation that we've been pushed in, the disconnect between work and home has the personal and professional kind of has got lost. And I think for me, the beautiful thing has been this challenge has suddenly thrown up talent, right? And I mean, as HR leaders, when you connect within the organization, you suddenly start seeing people step up like they've never before. And people that you never had potentially your talent systems did not earmark or didn't find them as potential have suddenly stepped up to the crisis and have started to blaze through. And the question is, when we get to the new reality past the pandemic, will we be able to sustain some of that? Now, as we look ahead, I think it's a reality that the economic environment is going to take some time to kick back. And the implication of that is upskilling, reskilling, etc. Amit, you talked about the fact that business models will change and will have to change going forward. Work arrangements are going to change forward. And there's a huge element of uncertainty, right? I think uncertainty coming from the fact that we don't know what the government is going to do, and we don't know how the customers are going to react. I mean, whilst we talk about customer journeys on one side, we can hypothesize on what it will be, but we don't know what it will really be. And we really don't know how our people are going to move forward. Mumbai opens shop starting Monday, and we don't know how many people will actually turn up to work. We don't want to force people to come to work, but we don't know what's going to happen. But I think the question I want to ask now to Kundan, you, is in the new world order that is going to become a part, that it's unfolding in front of us. How do you see performance being managed in a distributed world, right? Where people are going to be, like Amit said, anywhere. How do you manage performance in that context?
Before coming to performance, I guess one thing comes to my mind is, and which will ensure performance in these situations also, is, are we providing enough psychological safety to our people? So inside, in your organization, even customers who are coming to your office, there has to be a psychological safety in terms of understanding whether the organization is there for you. So, if you talk about an example, so I had a case where, there is an attrition happened. Now, that attrition had happened in a month's time. The person joined in the midst of COVID, and the person has left in the COVID. You don't know what has happened, actually. You have never met that person post joining. You and to be very frank, the joining happened after a month or so. So we had settled down. We had the business was recovering. We are seeing positive signs in terms of deals getting done. So there was a lot of positive environment in the organization, to be very frank. We were ensuring that the people who are there, there is constant communication, weekly town halls and all of that. Still, this happened. So I guess that's the first part we need to do as part of HR team, as well as the management, to ensure that this happens. Once this happens, performance, to be very frank, in terms of the way we have done appraisals this year, you will not believe, I do not see any difference in the way people have approached performance evaluations. And in fact, post-evaluation also, how the reactions used to be, I think it has remained same. So I guess performance, to be very frank, should be measured in the same way we used to do. We have been talking about, moving out of bell curve and things like that. So those discussions will continue. For me, I guess performance would continue to remain around, business deliverables, as well as the behaviors that you want to project at the office step. And I think, to be very frank, I do not see much of a difference in terms of performance being evaluated. The difference will come in the way you set performance measures, which will change because people who are joining new, people who are there in the organization, they're not sure when do they start performing, what's their inflection point. So I guess that's the big change that will happen. Measurement probably would remain the same in that fashion.
Thank you very much. So what I'm hearing you say is performance management as an approach won't change, but I think the measures of how we measure people, those measures may potentially look different. I'm going to quickly come to Lipika, and I think I said that in my opening comment that humans will be considered as biohazards because clearly humans catch a virus and then they are sick and then they have to be kept away. And I think three realities that are true and they're going to happen. One, organizations are going to become more and more efficient at the end, at the back of this pandemic. Second, less and less real estate for offices is going to be needed. And I'm sure all of us are really contemplating saying, did we need those fancy offices and so much of real estate footprint? And the third is likely chance that we're going to need less and less people. And when things like these happen, as HR heads, the thing we need to focus with our CEOs and leaders is, do we have the right people, and what are we doing to upskill our people constantly? Because we have a responsibility to ensure that the people that are with us, we carry them through the change journey. So Lipika, can you talk about what is thinking as we move forward into the new reality of role that we will have to play, and what is different that will have to happen from a reskilling perspective?
Definitely, Umesh. The thing is, with the new changes that are going to be brought in, like, it was pointed out earlier by Amit, a lot of digitization is going to happen, and we are going to have a digital workforce, more or less, with all of our processes being converted into digital processes. And he has also spoken about the processes which operations, or the processes which can be sustained and which can be reimagined. With these kind of changes that are happening and making it more agile and digital, there would be a lot of reskilling and upskilling which needs to happen around the digital piece itself, and the new processes which are being introduced are going to be introduced, and the kind of apps which are going to support, the kind of technology which is going to support. So this is one of the skilling that will be required to be provided. And along with that, a couple of other areas that we would need to focus on is, in terms of safety, hygiene, and all these kind of things, better ways and methods of managing those mental, keeping a mental well-being, keeping that also in mind. We have to talk about providing learning around those, and creating awareness around those, managing the financial, creating awareness and knowledge about those also. In addition to that, we have to talk about things which are going to come in after digitization. Like, for example, I won't be surprised if with digitization we come up with new terminologies like, digital employee behavior. So being able to skill and make the other employees aware of how to study the digital employee behavior, because people are used to understanding behavior or coming to know the other person by face-to-face interactions. But how do you judge, and how do you take a conversation or relate with a person with whom you're meeting digitally? How do you, understand that? So digital behavior and digital habitualization. That means how quickly you can unlearn, learn, or relearn. Digital mentoring. So, all these kind of things are things which are going to come up and open up. So we will need to focus our learning and upskilling around that. So that is from the digital aspect of it, safety and hygiene aspect of it, financial aspect of it. The other thing which will be there, obviously, is with this dispersed workforce, there's going to be a lot of, a lot of different kind of workforce which would be coming in, freelancers, gig workforce, people who are in different geographies. So one has to talk about more flattening of organization to be able to manage and handle this. So with a flattening of organization, you would need to have people who are, equipped across the roles in terms of laterally as well as horizontally. So equipping those people with those kind of skill sets to handle lateral and horizontal roles also. Those kind of also skills have to be in focus. So I think there's a huge range of skilling requirements which are going to come up, and along that there's going to be a huge range. The delivery is also going to change in terms of the learning aspect of it. A lot of it is going to be digital, so it is going to be, self-help, self-paced kind of thing, virtual learning, artificial intelligence-based learning. So there's a lot of things that I foresee as changes which are going to come, and which we as organization need.
Sure.
So that's a huge thing that's there out in front of us.
So I think you mentioned something very interesting. Kundan, I'm coming to you. Give me a minute. I think so. You made a very interesting point with respect to a flatter organization. And I think one thing that has happened in this pandemic and the lockdown environment that we've been all confronted with is the fact that suddenly the pace of decision making seems to have gone up. I don't know whether you guys noticed that or experienced that, but maybe we're putting in more hours. That's one, right? But somehow the bureaucracy in the organization suddenly seems to have shrunk, right? I don't know whether you guys are experiencing that, but Kundan, if I come to you and you react to that for me first, to say, how do we ensure that in the new world order that we're getting into, we don't lose this agility factor? We go back to say, send it to 3 people for approval, get me 3 quotations, all that nonsense we go back to, and we lose the agility factor, right? Which we somehow seem to have benefited from. And like Amit said, I mean, these are times we had to act fast if we have to sustain. So if you could respond to that, Kundan.
I don't know whether it is possible or no, but I'll try and put in some views. So, to be very frank, this work from home is very different from other work from home. So the setups used to be, there are two people who work from home. The rest of the organization is somewhere else. Now here, everybody is the same soup. And what's happening is, I think everybody is willing to get the job done. I guess the decision making is faster if the intent is to get the job done rather than looking to find what's in it for me, and looking for the functional intention rather than the organizational intention. Another thing which probably is happening is, since you're sitting alone, you don't have that luxury to kind of at times put your thoughts through, and you tend to talk to yourself at times, and you see a merit in it. You see a merit in the thing that somebody is talking. You're not seeing the non-verbal communication that really happens in front of somebody's in front of you. So, and there is a digital habit, where I read a survey, 90% people don't switch on their video in a meeting. So you're not looking at the person, you're not looking at how they're reacting to your comment, and you tend to start thinking that whatever you're saying is being accepted. So it will be a really great thing if we are able to take it to the organization when we open up. I guess what we can do is, can we recognize this behavior currently? So in a more in a manner which people understand that this behavior of theirs is being recognized. If we start doing that, I think we can take it to the office when we open up.
My request to everybody who is on the webinar right now is, I'm going to, in a question, I'm going to come and throw up the floor open for your questions. And I've been trying to weave in some of the questions that are on the Q&A box. So my request is, if you have a question that you would like to ask us and want us to wrestle with, my request to all of you is just put it in the Q&A tab, put your questions, and I'll try and ensure that the panel comes to it. I'm going to come to Preemita, to you. One important element in times like these, in crises like this, is trust, right? And there is enough and more research that talks about the fact that people trust their organization and organizational leaders far more than they trust the politicians in society. Now, well, that's a separate story about politicians, but talk to me about, how do we ensure that trust is maintained, and trust from a frame of the organization for our people, for our customers, and for the communities that we operate in, right? I think, and Amit made an interesting point in the opening, which is really, I think it touches a raw nerve about this whole, about the migrant workforce, people who are daily workers, etc. But how do we build, as an organization, how do we help build trust, and how do we hold trust for our people?
That is a very loaded question, Umesh. I must begin by saying that. And of course, very, very thought-provoking. I will like to share a few thoughts on that, and I'm sure my co-panelists would like to definitely add, because this is something which is integral to all of us as well. So in times of crisis, and in times that we are witnessing right now, I think leadership is going to matter more than ever. It is going to be the central piece, right? And those leaders who show care and genuine care, that will really form the basis of trust. It is really a time when you have to you have to demonstrate by way of your behavior, lot of caring, lot of listening, and empathy. What I'm saying is not really sympathy, actually empathy, being able to understand the position of the individuals objectively, process it, and then co-create solutions. So that is really the demand of the time today. Openness is going to be a very large factor. We are going to see the cultural manifestation of trust would be openness, would be open communication, would be transparency, uh, would be consuming feedback, would be learning, unlearning, and learning from everyone. That's where the hierarchies will really fall, because it is not a time when you can think that you have the answer to all solutions, or it is not a time where you can even imagine yourself to be on a higher ground and say what I'm thinking is right. It is not that time. It has been a very humbling experience these last 2 months, because the amount of ideas, the amount of value that has come from the front line has been immense. And that is where, when some of that is acted upon, when some of that is sought by a basic act of listening and then acted upon, some of it is institutionalized, that really builds trust. Of course, a very, very important aspect when we speak of trust is credibility. In very, very simple terms, it is you have to walk your word. Can I be heard? So you have to walk your word. Whether it is with the customers, whether it is with the employees, whether it is with the stakeholders. If you are making a commitment, that commitment has to be upheld. More than anything else, the commitments are going to matter. And all these, see, as adults, as human beings, all of us go by our experience. We can claim to be XYZ and we can claim to deliver XYZ, but that is not going to build confidence neither in the manager, nor in the peer, nor in the subordinate, and neither in the customer. All of these stakeholders are going to go by their experience. So it is about showing, walking the path and showing how you are going to keep your commitments. I think those will be my thoughts on trust. Similarly, I mean, from an HR profession standpoint, if I say goal setting, and Kundan talked a bit about that. Yes, goal setting also would have to be done in a measured way. We have always spoken about realistic goals, but more than ever now we will practice it, because that would be an element of generating trust, because then people are not second guessing you that is the bar being set too high on me to achieve an ulterior motive or etc. and whatever else. So Unmesh, those would be a few thoughts from me on that.
Can you guys hear me, or hello? Can you guys hear me? Hello.
Yes,
we can hear you. Amit, would you like to add to that till Umesh comes back?
Yeah, sure. So I think.
Hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Great point that you make, Preemita. I think very simply, I think there's a question here from Soma, I think, and connecting to your trust point is really the fact that simple things as do our leaders trust that when people are working from home, they are productive. And more often than not, it is our insecurities or our beliefs that we end up replicating or shadowing off on people, saying, maybe I'm not as effective working from home. Therefore, the belief that people from work who are working from home are not as effective. I think simple things like trusting our people to deliver to the outcomes is where things start. Amit, I'm coming to you to see some of the questions that are already thrown up here. And straight up, the question here that is being asked is it fair to lay off employees for no fault of their own?
Yeah, good question, and I think a very difficult one. There isn't, I mean, to be honest, there isn't a black or white answer to this, right? As you would probably expect. I mean, the business person in you would say that, yeah, I mean, sustainability of the business, even in the short term, is paramount. And I think you need to do what it takes to shore up your revenues, to make sure that you're not sinking below the threshold levels of expected performance, that your stakeholders and shareholders are constantly supportive of all the decisions you make. For startups, as you're seeing, I mean, there is, a host of, I think, difficult decisions they've had to make, because traditionally their business models have been built on high cash burn, right, which is not sustainable in times like that. And one after the other, I think they've come out with, difficult decisions that they've put out. But at the same time, I think aside the business leader's hat and look at the human leader in you, right? Which I think is equally important in times like this, or probably more important. I think the choices would be of exploring alternatives, right? Before you had to take a firm decision like laying someone off, which is consequential on the emotional, psychological, cultural aspect and cultural DNA of the organization as a whole. See, to me, I think principally it goes to really trying to balance short and medium-term decisions of profitability, right? Which are all about optimizing for today and important. Make no mistake, I think these are important decisions to be considered. It is all about optimizing for today versus creating value for tomorrow. I mean, which side of the house are you on fundamentally, and what is it that you have done in situations outside of this crisis to run your business as a high-performing one, right? And if you haven't done that, if you haven't done that with discipline, if you haven't managed your finances with discipline, if you haven't managed your cash flows, as robustly as you should have, if you haven't managed employees' expectations or taken some of those difficult decisions on a routine basis, the chances are that when confronted with a crisis like this, when confronted with a, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Some echo in the background. This is no news.
Go ahead, Amit.
Sorry, I was saying that when confronted with a crisis like these, all of those difficult decisions will suddenly come upon you, and there will be very, very little time to react. Chances are that you will make the easy decision out, which is to separate employees over there. But if you are somebody who has taken consistently a longer term call, right? This is where concepts like the triple bottom line we've heard so often, right? Balancing profit with purpose, planet, people, etc. All of those are so important for sustaining businesses over the longer term. And you take a horizon of multiple years in which you see return, not just for shareholders but for the community as a whole, right? Why is shareholder return the only form of return? I mean, you should challenge yourself, ask yourself if there are other returns to the environment, people, to the communities that are as important to manage. It goes all about, it really goes to the heart of the purpose of a business itself, right? Why does a business exist? I think sometimes those questions do come into consideration when you take decisions like that. So it all depends on which business you are in, what are your short to long term priorities, how you see those decisions playing out for you, how have you run your business in normal course of operations even before the crisis hit upon you. That will determine whether it is fair or unfair to take a tough calls like separating. Unfortunately, no easy answers, but I think it's just some choices that we need to think about.
No, thank you very much. I think you kind of offered a much more holistic wrapper around. But the reality of this is, look, I mean, we all know very well that anything over a period gathers slack. And I think never lose a good crisis, they say. There's nothing good about this crisis. This is an opportunity to try and do things like ZBB, zero-based budgeting, try and get the slack out of the system, look at discretionary spend, travel, everything that is considered nice to do, question some of that before you get to the hard things around headcount losses that you would like to create. Clearly, most organizations or disciplined organizations have cleaned up costs. They have meted out haircuts from a payroll standpoint to the senior leaders in the system. So clearly, senior leaders are taking far more cuts than what the cuts are going down at the bottom of the pyramid. So I think those are things to keep in mind. I want to go, Lipika, to you, and the question here that is being asked is, I'm going to fuse two questions together. One is to say, how do you see HR in the post-COVID era turning to be different or seeming to be different? And what role do you think technology is going to play in that? So if you can try and succinctly respond to that, then we'll look at some of the other questions. Lipika, over to you.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, Umesh, I think during our conversation earlier also, we spoke on the digital aspect of it and the technology part of it, where with diversified and dispersed workforce, our dependency on the technology is going to be very high. And with the agile operations and digitization of workforce, the technology dependency would be very high, and accordingly, the workforce need to be, prepared for that. In terms of what the role of HR is going to be in the future, HR has always, and it has always worked when it has been considered as a partner to the business and partner with the business operation strategy and the working of the business goals, and the business goals and the HR strategy has been aligned. So I think that is going to continue in terms of the role that it will play in terms of partnering. It's the organizational perspective which is going to change, and the HR perspective alongside will be changing. And a lot of support and mentoring will be required from the HR people and the whole team that is involved. What the focus of the HR is going to be, because the organization focus is going to change, it is going to change more towards employee well-being. Employee well-being, like I pointed out earlier, from all the four fronts in terms of physical, mental, financial, and social. So that's going to be the organizational focus, then business operations kind of focus, which is going to be more agile and digital. So the way I see HR is, it's going to be in partner with the organization, and the organization is going to be more employee and client friendly as before, but a little more, you will see those delicate aspects building into the organizational strategies and goals.
Thank you very much, Lipika. Preemita, coming to you now. For example, I've started my offices across the country. Mumbai starts on Monday, but there's a question here, and therefore I'm asking you, what are you doing with respect to readiness to bring the workforce back and bring it back seamlessly? What is the thinking that you guys have, and what is the counsel that you have for the audience of 250 odd people that we have here today?
Question with me? Sorry, I missed that earlier part.
No, Preemita.
Sorry, I heard Amit. So yeah. So Umesh, yes. See, it is very, very important not just to factor, but also to reflect that employee well-being, employee safety is your priority. So you have to take all actions to make sure that it is not just factored for in the preparation, but also immensely communicated through all means, direct communication, through manager communication, if required, a town hall to be done exclusively on this subject. Some of the things that we have done, I will share with you. May 3, when we started to see a little bit of opening up, and there was a circular from the RBI that NBFCs were included in essential services. We had started preparing for a restart, because the moment we got a nod from the regulator that we can be in that genre, we wanted to make some preparations. So we started by engaging, a team. We formed a work task force called Restart, and we started putting things together. We have taken care of the minutest of things. For example, shoe covers to be put in place for employees and visitors with a meeting office, markings to be made at all places where we think that there can be queuing up happening, so that social distance is maintained, whether it is right at the front of the office, or it is even in the areas within the office, like cloakrooms, etc., where queuing up can happen. So very basic things. Extra chairs were removed so that at all points in time there is social distancing maintained. So some of those aspects were done. But more important aspects, where the employees feel equipped, is in the communication and training of it. We trained all our staff members to share with them what are the back to work guidelines, how do they need to conduct themselves, what arrangements are being done from our perspective to make sure offices have been fumigated, sanitizers are in place, ACs are being totally checked, and all government norms with respect to that have been followed. All of that communication we have done with our employees. We have also helped them to say that yes, Arogya Setu app is for your own safety and security. It just gives you communication about it. So please download that. Temperatures, thermal checking will happen. Thermal scanning will happen. We have created our own little team of COVID warriors, which includes our security guards, which includes our office boys, which includes our, housekeeping staff. We address them as COVID warriors so that their instructions are duly followed and upheld by all staff members. And all of us, we are leading by example. Leaders are leading by example by, standing in the same queue, going through same thermal scanning when the others are coming in place. So all of this we had to do. We also had to issue e-passes because when we restarted, we had to do. But most important was that there was a little bit of, and somebody asked this question with respect to customers also. I have a bit of point of view on whether machines will take over us or not, and maybe we will have that conversation separately. But what I wanted to say is what is important is human beings value being enthused. Human beings value being energized. And that is a key role that has to be played by us as HR and by the people managers. Not to say over enthused or over energized, not to say that you, lose your sense of balance, that you become and start thinking in your head that all is well. In all communications we have said that please deal with the other person as if you are treating somebody who's COVID positive. Imagine yourself to be that nurse. Come with all the equipment, bring your own food, bring your own water. Those services would not be provided. So all the from the small and the big things, and I'm being able to rattle out because this is the type of communication that we have done with our employees. But all of this has been put in place to make sure that the restart happens.
Well, I'm smiling because I live and breathe this every day, right? We have a daily call for the crisis management team, and I was pretty much going through every row item as you were saying this. But I think, Amit, I want to tease out one element before I start wrapping this up, right? So whilst our offices are open, we are going to nudge people to come out. There is going to be an element of fear and anxiety in people to get back to work. People would have gone back to their hometowns. The younger populi has all gone back to their hometown because parents have called them back, etc. What is the thinking with respect to people not wanting to come back, refusal to work? What's your counsel there? How are you managing some of that?
Yeah, very real. I think very, very real and very, pertinent sort of situations and conversations. I think, like you said, I think we are all preparing to sort of reopen in a small way. I think following the government directive to get no more than 10% next week, etc., which I think is a reasonable number. Reasonable in the sense of starting to open in a small way. At the same time, not going overboard, with the risks and hazards that are there. Still very much there in cities that are, more affected by this infection than with the rest, right? So I think as we try to sort of go around, check with everybody in the organization, who are the people, who can make it, on day one, in week one. The message I gave to them is that, look, I think it would be nice to have them back. Start with those people who need to be there, for reasons of supporting essential services, for reasons of connectivity, for reasons of productivity, etc. But at the same time, we won't absolutely do anything silly. So if someone says that, I'm in a containment zone, someone says that if I can't step out because, my neighbor has got a positive case, etc., and there is that lurking feeling in their mind, we would absolutely step back, because I think safety, hygiene, health, well-being continue to be paramount, even as, we look at reopening in a small way. So I think that message of balance with having to attend, for client reasons, for support reasons, and for productivity reasons, I think is going down well. And I think we do see at least, the number that we want to come back next week playing out in front of us. But at the same time, getting there was not easy, because you had to do multiple turns of the handle, right, to get that small number also back in. Because what happened is that, my colleagues in the leadership team went back, spoke to their teams, and definitely more than a handful number of people and colleagues came back and said that, look, my family is not really supportive of me stepping out in this environment. Look, I stay at some distance from the office, public transport is not available, and how do I sort of make it back? Look, the cafeterias are likely to be working, and I'm not comfortable being in an environment co-located with several other people when it is not safe, and so on. So you do get those response. And like I said, I think what we told them is that we are taking all the necessary precautions. Eventually, we send them photographs, we send them messages of what the office environment would look like. We regularly put out protocols, advisories, guidances to them to assure them that the workplace is safe. And if they were to come over there, we will take care of, even the minutest of detail, right, over there. The one interesting thing that we are really evaluating is, a digital health assistant, which is helps, contact tracing in a closed sort of environment, in a contained environment, much more effectively. And if I were to get, let's say, 100 people to come to office, to activate that, location services, geo services, all of the other connectivity devices, etc., fully up and running, it would give a better sense of safety and security to people who are coming over there, because they will be able to, sort of real-time distance themselves from potential sources of the infection. So I think all of these things we are doing to build confidence, but it will take some time before people see others coming back, before they convince themselves and their families that it is safe to step out.
Thank you very much. And we're almost coming to that hour when we need to wrap up. This has been such an enriching conversation. All of you coming from your day-to-day experiences have offered so much insight about how to deal with the future that we are all getting into. And it's not an easy task trying to pull this together. But I think the way I look at this is, I think the big thing and the big challenge for organization is obviously going to be to reinforce trust back. To reinforce trust back into humanity, to reinforce trust back into your leaders, that the organization is doing the right thing by them when you may have to take decisions with respect to some payroll cuts, some headcount cuts, but the fact that you're doing it in the most transparent and fair manner. And there are certain principles that can stand the test of fairness as you are doing it. That's going to be imperative. Second is the daily laborers and the migrant workforce that has gone away. There's clearly a lack of trust in the fact that they will be taken care of if they were to come back. I think that is going to take a lot of effort to rebuild that trust. I think that's going to be imperative. Organization and our leaders will have to make behavioral shifts, and we have talked about that, whether it's first line supervisors or new leaders who have started to manage this, or leaders as they've potentially for the first time in their life have been surmounted with a crisis like this. So I think newer behaviors will have to be brought in. We have to accept and acknowledge that emotions have a big role to play, and I think we've all personally faced some of this, right? And like Kundan said, right, you're talking to yourself sometimes. But yes, we all have gone through those moments where we realize the value of emotions and the value of empathy and therefore compassion and the role that it plays in leadership. I'm hoping that structures that have been blown away right now, or the hierarchical that we are experiencing, we don't lose the essence of that when things go back into the future. And the bigger thing, I think, and a role that each one of us here has to play, and forums like CII also have to play, is the narrative shaping. And I think I see a question here to say, we haven't really gone over the hump, the curve hasn't really flattened, why open, right? Now look, we've been 75 to 90 days sitting cooked up. We know the economy is suffering. 90% of our workforce is contractual workers, right? I mean, in an environment like that, we have no choice but to open up. And therefore, it's important that each one of us play our role of shaping the narrative that till such time that the vaccine is in or the virus vanishes, we have no choice but to embrace the situation and play a responsible role of being able to live with Corona in a very responsible manner. So I think that's the choice that we all have to make. I again want to thank CII for creating this forum, for ideation, and for the group to be able to offer his thoughts here, and everybody else that's behind the CII forum to bring this here. Thank you very much. I hope that this was useful to all of you and we offered you something. And like I promised, our endeavor was to make it thoda sa hatke, thoda sa different than the other webinars that you've been attending. On that note, thank you very much. Have a fabulous Saturday and a great weekend, and make the most of it, and stay safe, everybody. Thank you. Bye to the panelists.
On behalf of CII, I thank all the panelists and the participants for participating. Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.